Before we get into the story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Your support fuels these stories. Make sure to like and subscribe because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless.
There is a moment, right before something terrible happens, when the world feels strangely calm, almost gentle, as if it is giving you one last chance to believe that nothing is wrong. Ha-rin would remember that moment forever. She would remember the hum of the elevator as it climbed past the 20th floor, the faint reflection of her own face in the mirrored wall, and the way her heartbeat sounded louder than the machinery, as if her body already knew what her mind refused to admit. She would remember thinking, not for the first time, if I just get through tonight, I can rest. That thought, she would later realize, was a lie she told herself every day. The elevator slowed. Then it stopped. Not smoothly, not gently, but with a sharp jolt that made the lights flicker and her stomach drop, followed by a silence so sudden it felt violent. The steady mechanical hum vanished, replaced by the sound of her breathing, uneven and exposed, echoing in the small space. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Neither did the man standing behind her. The emergency lights blinked on, dim and red, casting shadows that made the elevator feel smaller, more intimate than it had any right to be. Ha-rin's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, her knuckles whitening as she stared at her reflection, at the woman who looked composed enough to fool strangers but not herself. Behind her, Director Kang exhaled slowly, the sound thick with irritation rather than concern. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, tapping his phone against his palm. "This building gets more useless by the day." Ha-rin swallowed. She knew better than to speak first. Years of experience had taught her that silence was safer than explanation, that drawing attention to herself only invited scrutiny, and scrutiny always came with consequences. She stood very still, shoulders tense, eyes fixed forward, hoping that if she made herself small enough, invisible enough, the moment would pass. It never did. "You always freeze like this," Kang continued, his voice low and almost conversational, as if they were alone by choice. "Anyone watching might think I scare you." Her chest tightened, panic pressing against her ribs, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "I'm just tired, sir." The pause that followed felt endless. She could sense him behind her, close enough that she felt the warmth of his body without touching, close enough that one wrong movement would collapse the thin space she relied on for safety. "Tired," he repeated, tasting the word. "Then perhaps you should stop doing things that embarrass me." He reached past her to press the emergency button, holding it down longer than necessary, releasing it, pressing again, each movement sharp with impatience. The elevator shuddered faintly, then fell still once more. Ha-rin closed her eyes. "This is my fault," she told herself, the familiar thought wrapping around her like a shield. If I had stayed later, if I had taken the stairs, if I hadn't insisted on leaving when he did, this wouldn't be happening. Blame was comforting. Blame meant there was a reason. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Time stretched and thinned until it felt unreal, until the air itself seemed heavy, difficult to breathe. Then, suddenly, another sound cut through the quiet. Footsteps. Clear and deliberate. Ha-rin's eyes flew open. A man's voice came from outside the elevator doors, calm and steady, carrying authority without effort. "Maintenance reports a system freeze between floors 34 and 35. Is anyone inside?" Director Kang straightened immediately, his tone shifting the way it always did in the presence of real power. Yes, we are. Kang Min-yi of Hanseong Group." There was a brief pause. Then the voice replied, even controlled. "Understood. Please remain where you are. I'm taking control." Something about the way he said it made Ha-rin's pulse spike, not with fear this time, but with something unfamiliar, something sharp and electric, like the air before a storm. The elevator jerked as power rerouted, the lights brightening, the doors groaning before slowly sliding open. Beyond them stretched a wide, immaculate hallway, emergency lights reflecting off polished marble floors. And standing directly in front of the open doors, was a man Ha-rin had never seen before. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that looked effortless on him, his posture relaxed but alert, as if control was something he carried naturally. His gaze moved first to Director Kang, acknowledging him briefly, then shifted to her. And stopped. Not on her clothes. Not on her posture. On her face. On the faint shadow beneath her eye she hadn't completely hidden. On the way her fingers trembled, despite her best efforts to keep them still. Something unreadable flickered in his expression. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. The question startled her so much she almost laughed. Director Kang stepped forward at once, placing a hand on her shoulder, his fingers pressing just enough to remind her to stay silent. "She's fine," he said quickly. "My assistant tends to overreact." The man's eyes dropped to Kang's hand. Then they lifted again, colder now. "I wasn't speaking to you," he replied. The air shifted. Ha-rin felt it in her bones. "I'm okay," she said softly, out of habit more than truth. The man studied her for a moment longer, as if weighing something only he could see, then nodded once. "The elevator is secure. You may exit." Director Kang moved first, already distracted, his grip disappearing as soon as control returned to him. Ha-rin followed, legs unsteady. As she passed the man, his voice dropped, meant only for her. "You don't have to answer today," he said, "but I noticed." That night, lying awake in her apartment, Ha-rin touched the faint bruise beneath her eye and realized something had changed. Someone had seen the cage. And once something is seen, it can never be unseen. For 3 days after the elevator incident, Ha-rin convinced herself that she would never see him again. Men like that did not linger in moments. They passed through them, fixed what was broken, and moved on to larger rooms and heavier doors. She told herself he had already forgotten her face, the bruise, the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching. It should have comforted her. Instead, it left a strange hollow feeling in her chest. On the 4th day, she saw his name. It appeared at the bottom of an internal memo sent to every executive assistant on her floor, written in clean, precise language, formal but unmistakably authoritative. Chairman Seo Junhyuk will be on site this week for a full operational review. All departments are to cooperate fully. Ha-rin read the message twice. Chairman. So that was who he was. Her fingers hovered over the screen longer than necessary before she locked her phone and placed it face down on her desk, as if hiding the name might quiet the sudden tension curling through her stomach. Behind her, Director Kang's office door opened. She felt it before she heard it. "Did you see the memo?" he asked casually, though there was a sharp edge beneath the calm. "Yes, sir," she replied, standing immediately, posture perfect. His gaze lingered on her face, searching, assessing, making sure nothing had changed since the elevator. When he seemed satisfied, he smiled, the version of himself reserved for public spaces. "Good," he said. "You'll be accompanying me to all review meetings. Try not to embarrass me." Her lips curved into a practiced smile. "Of course." Inside, something tightened. Chairman Seo arrived the next morning. The office shifted the moment he stepped inside, like a room that had lost oxygen and suddenly regained it. Conversations lowered, movements became sharper, more intentional. People stood straighter without realizing they were doing it. Ha-rin was standing near the conference table, arranging documents, when she felt his presence behind her. Not close. Not threatening. Just there. She didn't turn right away. "Miss Han," he said calmly. Her breath caught before she could stop it. She turned. Up close, he looked different than she remembered, less distant, more human, and somehow more dangerous for it. His eyes were steady, observant, the kind that made it impossible to hide for long. "Yes, Chairman Seo," she replied, bowing slightly. He nodded once, acknowledging the respect, then glanced down at the files in her hands. "You're efficient," he said. "The reports were prepared well." "Thank you, sir." A pause followed, subtle but deliberate. "And your face," he continued evenly, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "looks better today." Her fingers tightened around the folder. "I'm glad," she said softly. He studied her for a moment, as if testing whether she would meet his gaze or look away. She held it. Something unreadable passed between them. Then he stepped back, turning his attention to the rest of the room, as if the moment had never happened. It had. The meeting itself was brutal. Chairman Seo asked questions no one expected, cut through polished presentations with quiet precision, and dismantled weak arguments without raising his voice. Director Kang grew increasingly tense as the hours passed, his confidence cracking under scrutiny. Ha-rin watched it all silently, taking notes, anticipating requests before they were spoken. Halfway through, Kang leaned toward her, his smile rigid. "Coffee," he whispered. "Now." She stood immediately and left the room. The hallway outside was empty, the air cooler, calmer. She exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. "You don't have to run every time he snaps his fingers." She froze. Chairman Seo stood near the windows at the far end of the hall, hands in his pockets, gaze turned toward the city below. "I was asked," she replied carefully. "So was I," he said. "That doesn't mean I always comply." She hesitated, then walked toward the coffee station, hands busy, grateful for something to do. "Do you enjoy your work?" he asked suddenly. The question landed softly, but it shook her more than the interrogation inside the conference room. "Yes," she said after a moment. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. "And your director," he continued, "is he considerate?" Her chest tightened. This time, she didn't answer immediately. She handed him a cup of coffee, careful not to let their fingers touch. "That's a dangerous question," she said quietly. A faint smile touched his lips, not amused, not kind. "Honest. I ask dangerous questions for a living," he replied. She met his eyes. The silence stretched. Finally, he nodded, as if he had received an answer she hadn't spoken aloud. That evening, Ha-rin stayed late again. She always did. By the time she gathered her things, the office floor was nearly empty, lights dimmed, the city glowing beyond the windows. She stepped into the elevator alone this time, heart racing despite herself. The doors slid shut. The descent began. Halfway down, the elevator slowed. Then stopped. Her breath hitched. Not again. Before panic could take hold, the intercom crackled to life. "Miss Han," Chairman Seo's voice came through, calm and unmistakable. "Please remain still. There's been a temporary system reset." Her hands trembled, but she stayed where she was. Moments later, the doors opened to reveal him standing there, composed as ever. "This building has a talent for unfortunate timing," he said. She let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "It seems so." He studied her carefully, then spoke more softly. "I meant what I said the other day. You don't have to answer yet." She swallowed. "And if I never do?" she asked. His gaze didn't waver. "Then I'll wait." The words settled between them, heavy with promise and danger. For the first time, Ha-rin wondered which of them should be more afraid. Ha-rin learned very quickly that waiting was its own kind of intimacy. Chairman Seo did not call her again that week. He did not summon her, did not linger near her desk, did not look for excuses to cross her path. After the elevator incident, he returned to being exactly what he was meant to be, untouchable, distant, absorbed in the machinery of power that turned without pause. And yet, she felt him everywhere. In the way Director Kang's temper sharpened, his patience thinning with each passing day. In the way meetings grew longer and more exacting. In the way the building itself seemed to hold its breath. It was subtle, almost invisible. But Ha-rin had survived long enough to recognize pressure before it crushed her. On Friday evening, Director Kang called her into his office just as the sun dipped low enough to paint the city in gold. "You're staying late," he said without looking up. Chairman CEO requested revised projections by morning. Yes, sir, she replied automatically. His eyes lifted then, slow and deliberate. You've been distracted lately. Her pulse spiked. I'll correct that. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with something like amusement. You should. People start to forget their place when they feel noticed. The word wrapped around her throat. I know my place, she said quietly. He smiled. Good. It was nearly 10 when she finally left. The building was silent in the way only corporate spaces could be after hours, hollow and impersonal, footsteps echoing too loudly against polished floors. She hugged her coat tighter around herself as she walked toward the exit, exhaustion pulling at every part of her. Miss Han. She stopped. Chairman CEO stood near the security desk, jacket draped over his arm, expression calm, unreadable. I didn't expect to see you so late, she said, heart racing despite herself. I could say the same, he replied. You work longer hours than most executives here. She hesitated, then answered honestly. It's easier to leave when everyone else is gone. His gaze sharpened slightly. Because silence doesn't judge, she said before she could stop herself. The words hung between them. He didn't react immediately. When he did speak, his voice was softer than she expected. You shouldn't have to earn quiet. Something inside her shifted. They walked together toward the exit, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel his presence, steady and grounding in a way that unsettled her more than fear ever had. Outside, the night air was cool. May I walk you home? He asked. Her first instinct was refusal. Fear sharpened by habit rose instantly. No, she said, then paused. I mean, it's not necessary. He nodded, accepting the boundary without question. Then allow me to call you a car. She hesitated again, then nodded once. As they waited, she found herself speaking without meaning to. Why are you watching me? The question slipped out softly, dangerously honest. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if weighing how much truth she could carry. Because someone should have noticed sooner, he said, and because you deserve to know you're not invisible. Her chest tightened painfully. The car arrived. Before she stepped inside, he spoke again. Miss Ha-rin. Her name sounded different in his voice, personal, careful. There are rules in this world, he continued, rules written by men like Director Kang. She met his gaze. And you? I enforce some of them, he admitted, and I break others. The car door closed. She watched him through the window as they pulled away, heart pounding with questions she wasn't sure she was ready to ask. The twist came the next morning. Ha-rin arrived at work early, coffee in hand, only to find the office buzzing with a strange, restrained energy. Ava from finance leaned toward her, whispering urgently, Did you hear? Hear what? Director Kang is under internal review. Ha-rin's breath caught. For what? Ava shook her head. No one knows. It came from the top. From the top. Her phone vibrated. A single message appeared on the screen, from an unknown number. I told you I would wait. But I didn't say I would stay still. Her fingers trembled. She looked up. Across the open office floor, through glass and distance and power, Chairman CEO stood in conversation with the board, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned his head. Their eyes met. This time, he did not look away first. Ha-rin understood then, with sudden terrifying clarity, that the rules governing her life were already shifting, and that the man responsible was far more dangerous than she had imagined. Not because he could hurt her, but because he was already changing the world around her, without asking permission. By Monday morning, everyone knew something was wrong. They just didn't know what it was. Director Kang arrived late, something that had never happened before, his usual polished confidence dulled around the edges. He smiled too much, laughed too loudly, and snapped at people who didn't deserve it. The office moved around him carefully, like a room full of people pretending not to smell smoke. Ha-rin noticed everything. She always did. She noticed the way Kang avoided the executive floor, how his door remained closed longer than usual, how his phone never left his hand. She noticed the sudden politeness of HR, the quiet presence of unfamiliar men in dark suits walking the halls with badges that didn't match anyone else. And she noticed Chairman Seo Jun-hyuk. He did not seek her out. That somehow unsettled her more than if he had. Their eyes met only once that morning, across the lobby, brief and measured, his expression carefully neutral. It felt deliberate, as if he were maintaining a distance he had chosen for a reason. The restraint gnawed at her. At noon, she received a calendar notification she hadn't scheduled. Private review, 1:30 p.m. Location, executive observation room. Her pulse quickened. The observation room was rarely used, a glass-walled space overlooking the city, designed for confidential evaluations and quiet decisions that reshaped careers without ceremony. At exactly 1:30, she knocked. "Come in," Chairman Seo said. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, the city spread beneath him like something already conquered. The room felt intimate despite its size, the silence thick with unspoken things. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, turning slowly. "Sit, please." She did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "Director Kang has filed a formal complaint." Her heart dropped. "Against me?" "No," he said calmly. "Against me." She stared at him. "Why?" "Because he believes I am interfering with his authority," Seo replied. "Which is not entirely incorrect." Fear flared. "Then why involve me?" "Because you are the reason," he said simply. The words settled heavily between them. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "That is precisely why I'm being careful." He moved closer, stopping several feet away, close enough that she could feel the gravity of his presence, but far enough that he did not cross a line. "There are many ways to dismantle a man like Kang," he continued. "Most of them are fast, public, cruel." Her fingers curled into her palms. "And the one you're choosing is slow," he said, "and legal and built on truth." She swallowed. "Truth can still hurt." "Yes," he agreed, "which is why I won't move further without your consent." The word echoed in her chest. Consent. No one had ever offered her that before. "Why?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why not just end it?" His gaze softened slightly. "Because if I end it without you, he remains the center of the story, and you deserve to be more than collateral." Emotion tightened her throat. "What do you want from me?" He held her gaze steadily. "I want you to choose." That evening, Director Kang confronted her. She was packing her things when he appeared at her desk, smile sharp, eyes cold. "You've been busy," he said lightly. She didn't look up. "I've been working." "Funny," he replied, "because suddenly people are asking me questions." Her hands stilled. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" he continued, leaning closer, lowering his voice. "You wouldn't be foolish enough to think someone like Seo Jun-hyuk is interested in saving you." She met his gaze at last. "I don't need saving." He laughed softly. "Everyone does, they just lie about it." His hand brushed her wrist, a reminder, a threat. "Be careful," he murmured. "Men like him don't protect, they possess." That night, Ha-rin couldn't sleep. Her phone vibrated just after midnight. A message from Seo. "Are you safe?" She stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "Yes, for now." The response came quickly. "Then rest. Tomorrow will not be gentle." The next day, the choice arrived. HR called her into a private meeting. Documents waited on the table, neatly arranged. Testimony. Her testimony. Her hands trembled as she read. Incidents, dates, patterns she had never allowed herself to name. "You don't have to sign today," the HR director said carefully. "But once you do, things will move quickly." Ha-rin looked through the glass wall. Chairman Seo stood outside, speaking quietly with legal counsel. He did not look at her. He did not signal. He did not pressure. He waited. She picked up the pen. Her phone buzzed. A single message. "Whatever you choose, I will not step closer unless you invite me." Tears blurred her vision. For the first time in her life, the distance between danger and desire felt like something she controlled. She signed. Outside the room, Seo closed his eyes briefly, a breath passing through him like relief mixed with something deeper. That night, as the city lights flickered on, Ha-rin realized something terrifying and intoxicating. She wasn't being rescued. She was being witnessed. And the man watching her had chosen not to touch the power he clearly possessed. Yet, by midweek, the building had developed a rhythm that made Ha-rin uneasy. It was not louder, not more chaotic. If anything, it was quieter. Doors closed more gently. Conversations ended the moment she approached. Emails arrived with careful wording, polite to the point of stiffness, as if everyone had suddenly learned the cost of leaving a trace. Pressure, she had learned, did not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived disguised as order. Director Kang felt it too. He began packing during meetings, standing when there was no reason to stand, sitting again only to rise moments later. His questions grew sharper, less patient, his voice cracking at the edges when answers did not come fast enough. Ha-rin tracked everything instinctively. She noticed how his calendar shifted, meetings added and removed without explanation. She noticed the way his phone vibrated more often, how he stepped into hallways to take calls he once would have handled openly at his desk. Most of all, she noticed how his eyes kept returning to her. Not with confidence, with calculation. On Wednesday afternoon, he summoned her without warning. "Close the door," he said the moment she entered. She did. The click sounded louder than it should have. He remained standing, jacket off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled back as if he were preparing for a fight rather than a conversation. Papers were spread across his desk in uneven stacks, fingerprints smudging the edges. "You've been very quiet," he said. "I'm working," she replied evenly. "So am I," he snapped. Then, catching himself, he forced a thin smile. "You understand the importance of loyalty, don't you, Ha-rin?" Her name in his mouth felt wrong. "I understand my responsibilities," she said. He circled the desk slowly, stopping just close enough to test her instinct to step back. She didn't. "Funny thing about responsibility," he murmured. "People like to confuse it with virtue." She met his gaze. "Is there something you need, sir?" For a moment, she thought he might strike the desk. Instead, he laughed, a brittle sound that did not reach his eyes. "You should be careful," he said softly. "This company is very good at deciding who belongs in it." Her pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "I belong here." He stared at her, something dark passing through his expression. "We'll see," he said. When she left his office, her hands were shaking. She did not stop them. Later that evening, the email arrived. No sender name she recognized. No dramatic subject line. Just a request for documentation review, phrased neutrally, routed through 3 departments, signed off by legal and compliance. It was impersonal, procedural, irrefutable. Seo's work, she realized. Not because his name appeared. Because it didn't. He was tightening the net without ever touching it. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. By Friday, Director Kang began making mistakes. Small ones at first, numbers misquoted, names forgotten, a presentation sent to the wrong distribution list. Each error alone was insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern that made people glance at one another and say nothing. Ha-rin felt the shift in the air. The building no longer leaned toward him. It waited. That afternoon, he cornered her near the copy room. "You think you're very clever," he said quietly. She kept her eyes on the machine. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," he replied. "You've been standing very straight lately." Her chest tightened. "Confidence looks good on you," he continued. "Just remember where it comes from." She turned then, meeting his gaze fully. "It comes from doing my job." Something in his face twisted. "You should remember," he said, voice low. "Who taught you how this place really works?" Before she could answer, footsteps approached. He stepped back instantly, smiles snapping into place as if it had been waiting. When she looked down the hallway, she saw Chairman Seo pass by at a distance. He did not look at her. He did not look at Kang either. He did not need to. The effect was immediate. Kang's shoulders stiffened, his jaw clenched. For a fleeting moment, fear slipped through the cracks of his composure. Seo disappeared around the corner. The damage remained. That night, Ha-rin stayed late again, finishing work she could have left for the morning. She needed the quiet, needed to hear her own thoughts without interference. As she shut down her computer, her phone vibrated. No name. Just a message. "You are doing well. Do not mistake calm for safety. Neither of us can afford impatience." She stared at the screen. "Neither of us." She typed, erased, typed again before finally sending. "I'm not afraid of waiting." The reply came after a pause long enough to feel deliberate. "Good. Then you understand what he never did." She turned off the lights and walked toward the elevator, heart steady despite the echoing hallway. Behind her, somewhere deep within the building, something old and fragile continued to fracture. And Ha-rin understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that the most dangerous moment was no longer the fall. It was the part where everything appeared to hold. Ha-rin feels it before she hears it. The office looks the same, screens glowing, keyboards clicking, the steady hum of air conditioning, but something has shifted beneath the surface. A pressure has lifted. The kind you never notice while it's there, only in the hollow it leaves behind. Kang doesn't arrive that morning. There's no announcement, no email, no explanation. Just an empty chair where his presence used to leak into everything. By noon, his name is spoken carefully. By evening, it fades from conversation entirely. HR calls it a review. Compliance calls it procedure. Everyone else calls it nothing at all. When Kang finally appears, it isn't to reclaim power. It's to collect what remains of it. His voice cuts too sharply through the hallway, too loud for a place that has already moved on. Anger spills sideways, at assistants, at security, at locked systems that no longer recognize him. He demands explanations from people who no longer feel obligated to give them. Ha-rin watches from a distance she didn't choose, but now understands. Kang is volatile because volatility is all he has left. Power didn't abandon him dramatically. It simply stopped responding. Seo never enters the scene. He doesn't need to. Earlier that week, through quiet meetings, neutral emails, careful alignment, he let the structure do what it was designed to do, protect itself. Kang wasn't accused. He was reframed. A risk, a liability, an inefficiency. Later, Seo passes Kang once in the corridor. There is no confrontation. No acknowledgement. Only absence. Kang sees him. Seo doesn't look back. That is when Kang understands. Ha-rin expects relief to feel larger, heavier, more satisfying. Instead, it arrives thin and precise, like a clean line drawn straight through her chest. No one asks if she's okay. No one apologizes. No one names what happened. And yet, it's over. She stays late that night, alone at her desk, long after the building empties. Beyond the glass, the city blurs into moving light. It's there, in the quiet, that something unsettling and freeing settles into place. Nothing here loves you. Nothing here hates you. Power doesn't feel, it functions. And now she understands how. She shuts down her computer, straightens her jacket, and walks out without looking over her shoulder. The elevator descends. Ha-rin stands alone inside it, reflected endlessly in the mirrored walls, calm, composed, unchanged on the surface. The bruise that once haunted her reflection is gone, not because it healed publicly, but because it was never required as proof. The doors close softly. As the elevator drops, the office lights above her floor switch off one by one, rows of brightness dissolving into darkness, until only the faint glow of the city remains beneath her. She doesn't rise. She doesn't fall. She moves forward, finally understanding which direction matters.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share it with someone who loves deep emotional romance stories like this one. Your support helps this channel grow.